You know what's funny? Most people think being unbothered means you don't care about anything. That's not it. Being unbothered is about protecting your peace, not your ego. It's not shutting people out. It's knowing how to let the noise pass right through you without it sticking. And the truth is, it's not something you're born with. It's something you train yourself to do. So today, I'm going to give you 5 simple behaviors that make you completely unbothered by anyone, no matter what they say, do, or try. Stop explaining yourself when no explanation is needed is one of the most liberating habits you can ever learn because it pulls you out of the endless loop of trying to manage other people's opinions. And the reality is, the more you explain, the more you invite others to poke holes, question you, or twist your words into something you never meant in the first place, and you end up giving away pieces of your peace just to satisfy someone's curiosity or criticism that didn't even deserve a seat at the table of your life. So the first step in becoming unbothered is knowing when silence or a simple statement is enough without an essay attached to it, because the moment you start defending yourself over every little thing, you've given the other person control over your energy and your time, and that's a currency you never get back once you spend it. So you have to get comfortable with the idea that not everyone will understand you and not everyone is entitled to the details. When you stop explaining yourself unnecessarily, you start to notice that the weight you are carrying wasn't from what people said, but from the pressure you put on yourself to be understood by them. And here's the truth that stings a little at first. Most people don't actually care about your explanation. They care about keeping the conversation in a place where they feel they have power over you. And when you cut the rope by refusing to over-explain, you pull yourself out of that tug of war completely, which changes the dynamic instantly because you're no longer playing defense. You're just living your life without offering every single thought as evidence in a trial that doesn't exist. And this is not about being dismissive. It's about valuing your own time and words enough to not spend them where they don't matter. There's a quiet confidence in people who don't over-explain, a kind of energy that says, I know what I'm doing, I know why I'm doing it, and I don't need your approval to keep going. And it's not loud or defensive, it's calm and self-assured because they've learned that validation is an inside job, not a reward you chase from the outside. And yes, some people will take your lack of explanation as arrogance or distance, but that's just because they've been trained to believe they're owed your reasoning, when in reality, they're not. And you owe them exactly nothing except the respect of being direct and concise if you choose to answer at all. One of the hardest parts about this is breaking the habit, because explaining yourself feels like you're smoothing things over, avoiding conflict, or making sure no one misunderstands you. But here's the trap. The more you do it, the more you teach people to expect it, and they'll push for it every time, even when you know it's not necessary. So learning to stop is going to feel uncomfortable at first. It's going to feel like you're holding something back, but what you're actually holding is your boundary. And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes until it's just the way you operate. Think about how many times you've said, I'm sorry, I can't, because, followed by a long list of reasons to make it sound acceptable, when you could have simply said, I won't be able to make it, and left it there. Or how many times you felt the urge to justify a choice you made about your own life, your own time, or your own priorities to people who aren't living your life and won't face the consequences of your choices, because explaining often becomes an unconscious attempt to win approval. But once you realize you don't need it, that need dissolves, and with it, so does the stress of constantly performing for an audience that didn't even buy tickets to your life. There's a huge difference between giving context when it's genuinely needed and over-explaining just to ease your own discomfort, and the key is learning to tell them apart. Because when you explain in situations where it matters, like clarifying expectations in a project or giving information that helps someone do their part, it's productive and necessary. But when you explain just because you're afraid of being judged, you're not helping them understand. You're trying to control how they see you, and that's a battle you'll never fully win. So it's better to step out of it entirely and focus on actions that speak for themselves. Over time, you'll notice the shift. You'll catch yourself mid-sentence before spilling details no one asked for. You'll let your short, clear answer sit in the air without scrambling to fill the silence. And you'll watch how some people get uncomfortable when they can't get more out of you. But that's not your problem, because every time you resist the urge to explain unnecessarily, you're reinforcing to yourself that you are allowed to live without constant justification, and that you trust yourself enough to stand by your choices without wrapping them in extra words for someone else's comfort. Let silence do. The heavy lifting is a skill that feels strange in a world where everyone rushes to fill every pause with noise, explanation, or defense. But silence is one of the most powerful tools you have when you're aiming to be unbothered, because it shifts the weight of the moment onto the other person, and most people aren't comfortable carrying that weight. They expect you to jump in, explain, react, or rescue them from the tension. But when you choose not to, you show that you're not controlled by urgency or emotional pressure. You're willing to let the air hang heavy if it means keeping your peace intact. And in that stillness, you keep all the control without raising your voice or proving a point. The thing about silence is that it's not empty. It's loaded with presence. It tells the other person that you're listening but not rushing to fix or defend. It creates space for them to either reveal more than they intended or to sit with their own words. And in either case, you've removed yourself from the reactive role and stepped into a position of calm authority, because people who are confident in their stance don't need to fill the space with constant talking. They know the weight of a pause often speaks louder than the words that could follow it, and that kind of control can shift the direction of a conversation without you even moving. Silence also forces people to deal with the reality of their own behavior, because without your defensive reaction to distract them, they're left with nothing to focus on but themselves, and that's uncomfortable for someone who thrives on provoking you. So when you resist the urge to fire back or explain and instead hold your ground quietly, you're taking away their favorite weapon, your reaction. And that's when you start to notice that the less you give them to work with, the quicker their energy fizzles out, because most of the time, their momentum depends entirely on yours. Learning to use silence effectively isn't about ignoring people or giving them the cold shoulder for the sake of it. It's about knowing that sometimes the best response is no response, because the moment you speak just to ease the tension, you risk saying more than you mean or giving someone more insight into your emotions than they've earned, and silence protects you from that. It allows you to think clearly, choose your words carefully, and decide whether this moment even deserves a response. And the truth is, most don't, because silence itself can close a door without you having to slam it. It takes practice to get comfortable with silence because it feels unnatural at first, like you're letting something go unresolved. But the truth is, most arguments and confrontations don't get resolved through more talking. They get resolved when one person refuses to feed them. And that refusal often looks like calm, steady quiet, not in a passive-aggressive way, but in a way that says, I'm not giving this any more oxygen. And the longer you can sit in that space without breaking, the more you'll realize that silence isn't weakness. It's a form of strength that doesn't need to announce itself. Over time, using silence becomes second nature, and you stop feeling the need to rush in and fill every pause. You start to value the space between words as much as the words themselves. And you notice how much more in control you feel when you're not scrambling to explain, defend, or react. Because silence doesn't just protect your energy, it projects a kind of quiet confidence that can't be faked. And when people see that you can stand comfortably in that space without flinching, they start to treat you differently, not because you've demanded respect with words, but because you've earned it without saying a thing. Control your tone, not their reaction, is one of the most powerful ways to stay unbothered, because it shifts your focus from trying to manage what you can't control to mastering what you can. And that's your delivery, your presence, and your energy in the moment. Because no matter how calm, kind, or logical you are, some people will still choose to misinterpret, exaggerate, or dismiss what you say. And if your peace depends on them responding exactly how you want, you'll always be on edge. But when you commit to keeping your tone steady and intentional, no matter their behavior, you take away their ability to pull you into their chaos, and you protect yourself from being dragged into emotional patterns that aren't yours to carry. Your tone is the signal you send out to the world about how much control you have over yourself, and people pick up on it instantly. Because when you're calm in your delivery, it's hard for others to escalate without looking like they're overreacting. And when you keep your tone grounded, it creates a kind of invisible barrier that says you can yell, you can throw accusations, you can try to provoke me, but I'm not matching that energy. And that stance changes the entire dynamic because it denies them the emotional fuel they're trying to get from you, which is often the only thing keeping their argument alive. Controlling your tone doesn't mean suppressing your emotions or pretending you're not affected. It means channeling those emotions into a form that serves you instead of sabotages you. Because the second you raise your voice, talk faster, or let frustration leak into your words, you're giving them evidence to twist, and you're letting them set the tempo of the interaction. So instead, you set the pace by slowing your speech, keeping your voice even, and making your pauses intentional. And you'll notice that when your tone stays consistent, it's much harder for the conversation to spiral into a shouting match or a personal attack. This kind of control takes practice because most of us mirror the energy we're given. Someone comes at us aggressively, and our instinct is to match their volume or defend ourselves just as strongly, but that instinct is exactly what they want if they're trying to get a rise out of you. And when you don't give it to them, when you stay level and unshaken, you're showing that you're not a puppet for someone else's emotions to pull around. You're the one holding the strings on your own response. And that's where your power is, because your tone speaks louder than your words ever could in those moments. You'll also start to see how your tone affects the outcome of conversations in ways your words alone can't, because people remember how you made them feel far more than they remember the exact phrasing you used. And if your tone stays measured, respectful, and clear, even when you're setting a boundary or disagreeing, it leaves a different imprint than if you let frustration color your delivery. And over time, this consistency builds a reputation. People learn that they can't push you into losing your cool, and that predictability makes it harder for them to justify escalating things with you in the future. Controlling your tone also helps you think more clearly in the moment, because when you focus on keeping it steady, you naturally slow down your responses, which gives you more time to choose your words wisely. And that pause is often all you need to avoid saying something reactive that you'll have to clean up later, because once words are out, they can't be taken back, and no amount of explaining can erase the way they landed. So holding on to your tone is like holding on to the steering wheel of the conversation, making sure it stays on a road you actually want to be on instead of veering into unnecessary conflict. Over time, you'll find that keeping your tone in check becomes less about managing tense conversations and more about the kind of person you're choosing to be in every interaction, because it's not just a tactic for dealing with difficult people, it's a habit that shapes how you move through the world, and the more you practice it, the more natural it feels, until it's just who you are. Someone whose words might change based on the situation, but whose tone stays steady, grounded, and untouchable, no matter how much someone else tries to shake it. Respond to facts, not feelings, is a mindset that keeps you grounded in reality when emotions start running high, because in almost every conflict or tense interaction, there's the surface level, how people feel in the moment, and then there's the underlying truth, the actual facts of the situation. And the mistake most people make is reacting to the emotional storm instead of anchoring themselves to what's real, which pulls them into arguments that go in circles because feelings shift, twist, and flare up, but facts remain steady. And when you train yourself to answer based on facts alone, you stop getting pulled into drama that has no clear resolution, and you start keeping the conversation in a place where clarity is possible. The problem with responding to feelings is that emotions can be contagious, And if someone comes at you with anger, frustration, or even guilt, your natural instinct is to match that energy without realizing it, which means their feelings end up steering your behavior. And that's exactly how you lose your peace, because instead of addressing what's actually happening, you're now reacting to the mood of the moment. And moods can be wildly inaccurate, fueled by assumptions, misunderstandings, or even someone else's bad day. So if you want to stay unbothered, you have to separate the two and make a conscious choice to only respond to what you can verify as true. This doesn't mean you ignore people's emotions or dismiss them like they don't matter. It means you acknowledge them without letting them dictate your own emotional state, because feelings are valid in the sense that people really do feel them, but they're not always reliable indicators of the facts. And when you respond based on the facts first, you keep the conversation anchored, you avoid adding fuel to the fire, and you make it harder for someone to drag you into a space where logic has no foothold, which is where most conflicts spin out of control. It takes discipline to stick to facts when someone is trying to pull you into an emotional reaction, because their feelings will often be loud, urgent, and persuasive. And they might even accuse you of not caring if you don't respond in the same emotional tone they're using, but that's just because they're used to people meeting them at that level. And when you don't, it throws them off balance. It forces them to either match your calmness or admit they're upset over something that isn't entirely grounded in reality. And either way, you've avoided getting tangled in an argument that goes nowhere. A practical way to do this is to slow the conversation down and focus on the specific verifiable parts of what's being said, asking questions like, what exactly happened? Or what's the part we know for sure? Because it's hard for someone to keep spinning a narrative that's purely emotional when you're calmly and consistently bringing it back to the details that can be proven. And even if they keep circling back to feelings, you don't have to follow them there. You can acknowledge the emotion without letting it become the foundation for your response. Interact with you because they start to see that you can't be baited by emotional swings, and that if they want to have a productive conversation with you, they have to come with something concrete. And that shift doesn't just keep you unbothered in the moment, it reshapes your relationships, because you're no longer a participant in the emotional roller coaster. You're the steady ground people have to meet if they want to be heard. Decide what's worth your energy before you give it is the filter that stops you from pouring yourself into situations, people, or arguments that don't deserve a single drop of your time. Because the truth is, you don't have unlimited emotional bandwidth. And if you spend it on every little thing that comes your way, you'll be drained before you even get to the things that actually matter. So being unbothered isn't about never caring. It's about caring selectively with intention. And that starts with pausing before you react, asking yourself whether this moment is worth the emotional cost it's about to take from you, because once you give your energy to something, you can't get it back. When you make a habit of deciding what's worth your energy ahead of time, you create an internal standard that everything has to pass before it gets your attention, and that standard might look different for everyone. Maybe for you, it's about whether the situation affects your life in a lasting way, or whether engaging will lead to an actual solution instead of just more noise. And once you get clear on that, it becomes easier to let things pass without feeling like you're letting people walk all over you, because you know you're not avoiding conflict out of fear, you're avoiding it out of wisdom. And that's a completely different kind of power. The trap most people fall into is reacting first and thinking later. And that's how you end up in conversations that go nowhere, arguments that repeat in cycles, or situations where you've invested hours of emotional effort only to realize it made no difference. And the reason that happens is because you didn't stop to ask whether it was worth engaging in at all. So the more you train yourself to slow down and assess before you step in, the more control you'll have over your own emotional reserves, and the less you'll find yourself feeling drained by people who thrive on pulling you into their problems or drama. It's important to remember that not every problem is yours to solve, and not every comment is yours to answer, And when you can recognize that in real time, it saves you from the endless loop of over-explaining, defending, or trying to change someone's mind who's already made it up. Because sometimes the smartest thing you can do is to simply walk away, not because you've lost, but because you've decided the game isn't worth playing. And the sooner you can make that decision, the more peace you protect for yourself in the long run. One of the most freeing parts of this habit is that you stop feeling guilty for not responding to everything because you realize your energy is not public property. It's yours to protect and distribute as you see fit. And that means you don't owe a reaction to every opinion. You don't owe your involvement to every issue. And you definitely don't owe your attention to people who only show up to take from it. So when you start choosing where your energy goes with intention, you naturally attract situations and relationships that respect that boundary because you're no longer signaling that you're endlessly available to be pulled into anything.